In a small, peaceful town surrounded by lush green hills and thick forests, there lived a man named Marcus Kane. Marcus wasn't someone who stood out in a crowd. He was an ordinary guy with calloused hands from years of fixing cars and a heart full of quiet dreams. His auto shop, tucked away on the edge of town, was his pride and joy. It wasn't fancy, just a modest garage with tools neatly arranged and the smell of motor oil lingering in the air. But it was where Marcus felt most at home. For years, he worked tirelessly, day in and day out, to provide for his family. He was known around town as a calm, dependable person who could fix anything, whether it was a broken-down car or a neighbor's lawnmower. Marcus had always believed in doing things the right way. He treated everyone fairly, charged reasonable prices, and never cut corners. People trusted him because they knew he cared about more than just making money. He genuinely wanted to help. But life wasn't always easy for Marcus. Like many others, he faced challenges that tested his patience and resolve. Some days were harder than others, but Marcus never gave up. He had a quiet strength that people admired, even if they didn't say it out loud. The town itself was picturesque, with tree-lined streets, friendly faces, and a sense of community that made it feel like home. However, beneath its charming surface, trouble was brewing. Over the past few months, whispers of discontent began spreading among the residents. At the center of all this unrest was a woman named Karen Thompson. Karen wasn't new to the town, but lately she had become impossible to ignore. She had appointed herself the self-proclaimed ruler of the neighborhood, constantly meddling in other people's lives and enforcing rules that only she seemed to care about. Karen's behavior started small, a complaint here, a demand there, but soon escalated into something much bigger. She would march into local businesses, pointing out flaws no one else noticed, or call meetings to discuss issues no one else cared about. Her favorite phrase, "You need to do something about this." Whether it was criticizing how someone parked their car or insisting that a neighbor repaint their fence, Karen made sure everyone knew she was watching. Most people avoided her whenever possible, fearing her sharp tongue and endless list of grievances. For Marcus, Karen's antics were nothing more than background noise. At first, he didn't pay much attention to her drama, focusing instead on his work and his family. But everything changed when Karen set her sights on his auto shop. One afternoon, while Marcus was busy repairing a truck, Karen stormed into the garage, clipboard in hand. She complained about the noise from the tools disturbing her afternoon tea, despite living blocks away. When Marcus politely explained that the shop had been there long before she moved in, Karen wasn't satisfied. Instead, she vowed to shut him down, claiming his business was ruining the ambience of the neighborhood. At first, Marcus tried to brush it off, thinking it was just another empty threat. But as days turned into weeks, Karen's harassment grew worse. She filed complaint after complaint, showing up at town meetings to accuse Marcus of every imaginable wrongdoing. Though none of her claims held water, her persistence began to wear on him. Marcus realized that Karen wasn't going to stop until she got what she wanted. And that meant he had to find a way to protect not just his livelihood, but also the spirit of the community he loved so dearly. Little did he know, this was only the beginning of a battle that would change his life forever. Karen Thompson was not your typical neighbor. She wasn't the kind of person who baked cookies for block parties or offered to help when someone needed a hand. Instead, she thrived on chaos and control, making her presence felt in ways that left the townspeople exasperated. Karen had always been vocal about her opinions, but over time, her behavior escalated into something far more extreme. She became the self-appointed watchdog of the neighborhood, patrolling the streets with a clipboard in one hand and a cell phone in the other, ready to report any perceived offense to anyone who would listen. Her rise to power began subtly enough. At first, it was small things, complaining about a mailbox painted the wrong shade of blue, or demanding that a family remove their holiday decorations weeks after the season ended. But as Karen gained confidence, her grievances grew louder and more frequent. She started attending every town meeting, using them as her personal stage to air complaints that ranged from trivial to absurd. Her voice carried through the room like a siren, drowning out anyone who dared disagree. The townsfolk quickly learned that arguing with Karen was pointless. She always found a way to twist words and make herself look like the victim. What made Karen truly formidable, though, was her knack for manipulation. She knew how to play people against each other, turning minor disagreements into full-blown feuds. If someone crossed her, even unintentionally, she wouldn't hesitate to retaliate. A local cafe owner once refused to remake her coffee order after she claimed it was too frothy. In response, Karen posted scathing reviews online, accusing the cafe of poor service and unsanitary conditions. Business dropped overnight, forcing the owner to apologize publicly just to keep his doors open. Stories like this spread quickly, cementing Karen's reputation as someone no one wanted to cross. When Karen set her sights on Marcus's auto shop, it wasn't because she genuinely cared about noise levels or zoning laws. It was because Marcus represented everything she couldn't stand: independence, hard work, and quiet dignity. To Karen, Marcus's success was a challenge to her authority. How dare he run a thriving business without seeking her approval? How dare he ignore her demands and continue operating as if she didn't exist? For Karen, shutting down the auto shop wasn't just about silencing the sound of tools. It was about proving that she was the one in charge. Karen's campaign against Marcus started with subtle jabs. She sent letters to the town council, claiming his shop violated noise ordinances despite being well within legal limits. When that didn't work, she escalated, organizing petitions and rallying neighbors to join her cause. Most people refused, knowing her accusations were baseless, but Karen didn't care. She plastered flyers around town, exaggerating her claims and painting herself as the defender of peace and quiet. Her tactics were relentless, designed to wear Marcus down until he gave up. Despite her bravado, Karen wasn't fooling everyone. Many residents saw through her act, recognizing her complaints for what they really were: attempts to assert dominance over a community that didn't want her interference. But fear kept most of them silent. They'd seen what happened to those who opposed Karen, and they weren't eager to become her next target. So while whispers of discontent circulated behind closed doors, no one stepped forward to support Marcus. At least, not yet. For Marcus, dealing with Karen felt like trying to reason with a storm. Every attempt to explain himself only fueled her anger. When he pointed out that his shop predated her arrival in the neighborhood, she dismissed him with a wave of her hand. When he suggested compromises, such as adjusting his working hours, she declared them insufficient. It was clear that Karen wasn't interested in solutions. She wanted submission. And Marcus, proud and principled as he was, wasn't about to give her the satisfaction. As tensions mounted, Marcus realized something important. This fight wasn't just about him anymore. Karen's bullying had gone unchecked for too long, emboldening her to push boundaries further and further. If he backed down now, it wouldn't stop with his auto shop. Others would suffer next, and the entire community would pay the price. Something had to change, and Marcus decided it was time to take a stand. The tension between Marcus and Karen reached a boiling point when the town council announced a special meeting to address her complaints about the auto shop. Marcus knew this was his chance to defend himself, but he also understood that facing Karen wouldn't be easy. She thrived in these situations, loud, dramatic, and unrelenting. For days leading up to the meeting, Marcus prepared meticulously. He gathered documents proving his compliance with local regulations, collected testimonials from satisfied customers, and even recorded decibel readings to demonstrate that the noise levels from his shop were well within acceptable limits. Still, as he walked into the community center that evening, he couldn't shake the feeling that logic might not be enough to counter Karen's theatrics. The room buzzed with anticipation as residents filed in, some out of curiosity, others out of concern. Karen sat near the front, her clipboard clutched tightly in her hands like a warrior ready for battle. When the meeting began, she wasted no time launching into her tirade. Her voice echoed through the room as she listed every supposed offense Marcus had committed, from disturbing the peace to ruining property values. Each accusation was delivered with exaggerated emotion, complete with dramatic pauses and pointed glances at the audience. It was clear she was trying to sway public opinion before Marcus even had a chance to speak. When it was finally his turn, Marcus took a deep breath and approached the podium. Unlike Karen, who relied on volume and spectacle, Marcus spoke calmly and clearly. He began by thanking everyone for coming, acknowledging their concerns, and expressing his love for the town. Then, one by one, he dismantled Karen's arguments. Using charts and data, he showed how his shop operated within legal guidelines. He shared heartfelt stories from loyal customers whose cars he'd repaired, emphasizing the role this business played in keeping the community running smoothly. When he played the audio recordings of his workshop, demonstrating that the noise barely registered above the hum of traffic outside, a murmur of agreement rippled through the crowd. Karen, however, wasn't ready to concede. As soon as Marcus finished speaking, she jumped up, accusing him of falsifying evidence and manipulating facts. "How can we trust someone who profits off our misery?" she demanded, pointing an accusatory finger at him. Her tone grew increasingly shrill, and her gestures more erratic. But instead of intimidating the audience, her over-the-top behavior started to work against her. People exchanged skeptical glances, whispering among themselves about how unreasonable she sounded. Marcus remained composed, refusing to let Karen provoke him. When she accused him of being selfish, he responded with quiet dignity. "I've lived here for years," he said. "This shop isn't just my livelihood, it's part of this community. I care about this town and the people in it. If there are real concerns, I'm happy to address them. But making baseless accusations doesn't help anyone." His words struck a chord with many in the room. Even those who had initially been swayed by Karen's rhetoric began to see through her act. One elderly man stood up and said, "Marcus has always been fair and honest. I don't understand why we're attacking someone who works so hard for us." Others nodded in agreement, emboldened by his courage to speak up. For the first time, Karen looked rattled. Her usual confidence wavered as she realized the tide was turning against her. Despite the growing support for Marcus, the meeting ended without a resolution. The council promised to review the evidence and make a decision later, but something important had shifted that night. Marcus had proven that he wasn't going to back down, and he had shown the townspeople that standing up to Karen was possible. As he packed up his papers and left the community center, several neighbors stopped him to offer words of encouragement. "You did great tonight," one woman told him. "Don't let her get to you." Though the fight was far from over, Marcus felt a renewed sense of purpose. He realized that this wasn't just about saving his auto shop anymore. It was about setting an example. If he could stand firm against Karen, maybe others would find the courage to do the same. And as he drove home that evening, the quiet determination in his heart burned brighter than ever. After the town meeting, Marcus knew he couldn't face Karen alone. While he had managed to hold his ground and expose her tactics to some extent, it was clear that she wouldn't stop until she got what she wanted. If Marcus was going to win this fight, he needed allies, people who were tired of Karen's bullying and willing to stand up with him. But rallying the community that had grown used to staying silent wasn't going to be easy. Many residents feared retaliation or simply didn't want the drama in their lives. Still, Marcus believed that if he could show them they weren't alone, they might find the courage to push back together. The next morning, Marcus started small. He began by talking to his regular customers at the auto shop. Between oil changes and tire rotations, he shared stories about Karen's behavior, not just toward him, but toward others in the town. "Did you hear about how she went after Joe's cafe?" he asked one customer while tightening bolts under a car hood. "Or how she tried to shut down the farmer's market because someone parked in her spot?" These conversations opened the floodgates. His customers, many of whom had endured similar run-ins with Karen, started sharing their own experiences. They talked about missed opportunities, lost business, and sleepless nights spent worrying about her next move. By the end of the day, Marcus realized he wasn't the only one fed up with her antics. Encouraged by these discussions, Marcus decided to take things further. He reached out to a few trusted neighbors, inviting them over for coffee one evening to discuss a plan. The turnout was modest, just 5 people, but it was a start. Around the kitchen table, Marcus laid out his vision: a united front against Karen's tyranny. "We can't let her divide us," he said firmly. "If we stick together, we can protect our town and make sure no one has to deal with her nonsense alone." The group agreed to spread the word, reaching out to others who had been affected by Karen's actions. Slowly but surely, the idea gained momentum. Word traveled quickly, especially among those who had suffered quietly for years. A local baker revealed how Karen had complained about the smell of freshly baked bread wafting into her yard, claiming it gave her headaches. A young family confessed they'd been forced to repaint their house after Karen deemed the color too bright. Even members of the community board admitted they felt pressured into siding with her during meetings. Each story added fuel to the growing movement. What started as a handful of frustrated individuals soon blossomed into a network of determined townsfolk ready to reclaim their peace. Marcus dubbed the group the King's Guard, inspired by the unity and strength they displayed. It wasn't just a clever name. It became a symbol of resistance. Members wore pins shaped like crowns to meetings and events, signaling solidarity without saying a word. Their mission was simple: document every instance of Karen's misconduct, expose her hypocrisy, and present a united voice at town gatherings. Marcus took charge naturally, not because he sought leadership, but because everyone looked to him for guidance. His calm demeanor and unwavering resolve made him the perfect figurehead for the cause. To prepare for future battles, the King's Guard began gathering evidence. They collected screenshots of Karen's online rants, recorded instances of her confrontations, always discreetly, and compiled a timeline of her most egregious offenses. One member even created a binder filled with testimonials from victims of her bullying, a damning record that would prove invaluable when the time came. Meanwhile, others worked on building awareness within the community. Flyers titled "Stand Together" appeared around town, urging residents to join forces against divisiveness and fear. As the days passed, the King's Guard grew stronger. Neighbors who once avoided each other now exchanged warm smiles and encouraging words. Local businesses hung signs in their windows declaring support for Marcus and the movement. For the first time in years, the town felt alive, not with tension, but with hope. Karen remained oblivious to the storm brewing around her, still convinced that her grip on the community was unshakable. Little did she know, the King's Guard was preparing to strike back, and this time, she wouldn't see it coming. The King's Guard wasted no time putting their plan into action. Armed with evidence, determination, and a growing sense of unity, they began dismantling Karen's influence piece by piece. Their first move was subtle but effective, exposing her hypocrisy in public forums where she felt most powerful. At the next town meeting, Marcus stood confidently at the podium, flanked by members of the King's Guard who had come to show their support. The room buzzed with anticipation as residents packed the space, curious to see how this showdown would unfold. Karen arrived late, sweeping into the room like a storm cloud. Her clipboard was clutched tightly under one arm, and her lips were already pursed in preparation for battle. She took her usual seat near the front, glaring daggers at Marcus, as if trying to intimidate him before he even spoke. But Marcus didn't flinch. He began his presentation calmly, thanking everyone for attending and acknowledging the concerns that had brought them together. Then, with precision and clarity, he laid out the facts. Using a projector screen borrowed from the local school, Marcus displayed photos, documents, and recorded audio clips that painted a damning picture of Karen's behavior. There was footage of her yelling at a young mother over a misplaced stroller, emails showing her attempts to sabotage small businesses, and even screenshots of her social media posts mocking neighbors behind their backs. Each piece of evidence was presented without anger or accusation, just cold, hard truth. As the slideshow continued, the atmosphere in the room shifted. Whispers turned into murmurs, then into outright gasps as people realized just how far Karen had gone to impose her will on the community. Karen squirmed in her seat, visibly uncomfortable as her secrets were laid bare. When she finally couldn't take it anymore, she jumped up, pointing an accusatory finger at Marcus. "This is slander," she shouted, her voice shrill and desperate. "You're twisting things to make me look bad." But instead of rallying support, her outburst only made her appear guilty. Several members of the King's Guard stood up, one after another, to share their own experiences of being targeted by Karen. A retired teacher recounted how Karen had complained about children playing tag in the park, calling it a nuisance. A shop owner described how she'd threatened legal action over a sign hanging outside his store. Each story chipped away at Karen's credibility, leaving her increasingly isolated. What struck the audience most was Marcus's composure throughout the ordeal. While Karen grew more frantic and defensive, Marcus remained calm and collected, responding to her interruptions with polite but firm rebuttals. When she accused him of lying, he simply asked, "Then why don't you explain these documents yourself?" The crowd leaned forward, eager to hear her response, but Karen faltered. For once, her usual arsenal of excuses and manipulations failed her. Instead of gaining ground, she dug herself deeper into a hole. By the end of the meeting, the tide had turned decisively against Karen. The townspeople who had once feared her now saw her for what she truly was, a bully who thrived on division and control. Even some of her former allies on the community board distanced themselves, embarrassed to have ever supported her agenda. As the meeting adjourned, Marcus received a standing ovation, a rare moment of unity in a town that had long been fractured by fear and resentment. Outside the community center, members of the King's Guard gathered to celebrate their victory. Though they knew Karen wouldn't give up easily, they felt a renewed sense of hope. They had proven that when people came together, they could overcome even the toughest challenges. Marcus smiled as he looked around at the faces of his friends and neighbors, their eyes shining with pride and determination. This wasn't just a win for him, it was a win for the entire town. And deep down, Marcus knew this was only the beginning. Karen was not someone who took defeat lightly. When she stormed out of the town meeting, her face flushed with embarrassment, and her clipboard clutched so tightly her knuckles turned white, it was clear she wasn't done fighting. For days afterward, she plotted her next move, determined to reclaim the power she believed was slipping through her fingers. She convinced herself that the townspeople were simply misled by Marcus's charade, and that all she needed was one more chance to prove her point. But this time, she wouldn't rely on logic or reason. She would strike fear into the hearts of anyone who dared oppose her. Her first retaliation came in the form of frivolous lawsuits. Karen filed legal complaints against Marcus, accusing him of everything from noise violations to emotional distress. She even went after several members of the King's Guard, claiming they had defamed her character during the town meeting. Each lawsuit was baseless, but that didn't matter to Karen. Her goal wasn't to win in court. It was to overwhelm them with paperwork and legal fees, hoping they would buckle under the pressure. At first, the sudden barrage of legal threats rattled some members of the group. A few worried whispers spread among the ranks. "What if we can't afford this? Maybe we should just back off." But Marcus refused to let fear take hold. He called an emergency meeting of the King's Guard at his garage, where he reminded everyone why they had started this fight in the first place. "She wants us to give up," he said firmly. "But every time we stand our ground, we show her that she doesn't control us. We're stronger together." To ease concerns about the lawsuits, Marcus reached out to a local attorney who had heard about their cause and agreed to help pro bono. With professional guidance, the group quickly realized that Karen's legal threats were empty gestures meant to intimidate, not actual cases with merit. Undeterred by her failure in court, Karen escalated her tactics. She began spreading rumors around town, painting Marcus and the King's Guard as troublemakers trying to destroy the community. Flyers appeared overnight, plastered on lampposts and mailboxes, accusing Marcus of corruption and greed. One particularly nasty flyer claimed he had bribed neighbors to speak out against her, a blatant lie that shocked even those who had once tolerated her behavior. But instead of damaging Marcus's reputation, the smear campaign backfired spectacularly. Residents saw the flyers for what they were: desperate attempts to manipulate public opinion. Many tore them down angrily, vowing to support Marcus even more strongly. Karen's final gambit was perhaps her most dramatic. On a Saturday morning, she organized a protest outside Marcus's auto shop, complete with signs reading "Save Our Neighborhood" and "Stop the Noise Pollution." She brought along a small group of supporters, mostly acquaintances she had guilt-tripped or coerced into joining her, and marched up and down the sidewalk chanting slogans. Passers-by stopped to watch, expecting another heated confrontation. But what happened next caught everyone off guard. As Karen led her chant, members of the King's Guard arrived unexpectedly, carrying trays of coffee and homemade snacks. They handed them out freely to onlookers, inviting people to stay and chat. Instead of engaging in arguments, they laughed and joked, turning the protest into something resembling a block party. When Karen tried to rally her troops with louder chants, the crowd responded with applause for Marcus. Someone even started playing music, drowning out her voice entirely. Within minutes, her protest devolved into chaos. Supporters drifted away, embarrassed by the spectacle, while Karen stood alone, red-faced and fuming. By the end of the day, news of the failed protests spread like wildfire. Videos of the events circulated online, showing Karen's increasingly unhinged behavior as the crowd cheered for Marcus instead. The hashtag Unstoppable King's Guard trended locally, drawing attention and admiration from neighboring towns. What Karen had intended as a grand final to crush her opponents only cemented their victory. As Marcus locked up his shop that evening, he couldn't help but smile. The King's Guard had proven once again that unity and kindness could disarm even the sharpest attacks. And though Karen still lingered in the shadows, plotting her next move, it was clear her reign of terror was coming to an end. The final showdown came on a crisp autumn evening during a packed town hall meeting. The air buzzed with anticipation as residents filled every seat, eager to witness what everyone knew would be the decisive moment in the battle between Marcus and Karen. Word had spread quickly about the evidence the King's Guard had gathered, and the community was ready to see justice served. Karen, however, remained defiant. She strode into the room with her usual air of superiority, wearing a blazer that screamed authority, and carrying her now infamous clipboard like a weapon. Her lips were pressed into a thin line, and her eyes darted around the room, searching for cracks in the opposition. But there were none. When the meeting began, Karen wasted no time taking the stage. With theatrical flair, she launched into a tirade, accusing Marcus and the King's Guard of orchestrating a smear campaign against her. "This is harassment," she declared, her voice rising with each word. "They're trying to ruin my reputation because I dared to stand up for this town." She paced back and forth, gesturing wildly, clearly hoping to sway undecided listeners. For a fleeting moment, her confidence seemed unshakable. But Marcus was prepared. When it was his turn to speak, he approached the podium with calm assurance. He didn't raise his voice or resort to theatrics. He simply laid out the facts. One by one, he presented irrefutable proof of Karen's misdeeds. Emails where she threatened neighbors, receipts showing frivolous legal filings funded solely to intimidate, and even video footage of her berating local business owners. Each piece of evidence hit like a hammer, leaving Karen scrambling to defend herself. At first, she tried to dismiss the documents as fake, but when Marcus revealed timestamps and verified sources, her denials fell flat. The crowd watched intently, their expressions shifting from curiosity to disbelief. A few people shook their heads in disgust as they realized the extent of Karen's manipulations. Even members of the community board who had once supported her quietly exchanged uneasy glances. Sensing her isolation, Karen grew increasingly desperate. She pointed fingers at random attendees, accusing them of conspiring with Marcus. "You're all blind followers. She shouted, her voice trembling with frustration. "He's manipulating you." That's when something remarkable happened. One by one, former allies stood up and distanced themselves from her. A man who had once joined her protests admitted he'd only done so because she promised favors in return. A woman who had signed one of Karen's petitions confessed she hadn't read it carefully before adding her name. Each confession chipped away at Karen's credibility until she was left standing alone at the front of the room, her face flushed with humiliation. Finally, Marcus delivered the knockout blow. He projected a timeline onto the screen, detailing every complaint Karen had ever filed and how none of them held water upon closer inspection. The piece de resistance was a recording of Karen admitting, in her own words, that she enjoyed making others uncomfortable. The room erupted in gasps and murmurs as the truth became undeniable. Karen's mask of righteousness crumbled completely. Unable to withstand the weight of her exposure, Karen stormed out of the meeting in tears, shouting over her shoulder about how everyone would regret turning against her. But no one followed her, not even those who had once feared her wrath. As the doors slammed shut behind her, the room erupted in applause. People cheered for Marcus and the King's Guard, celebrating not just their victory, but the restoration of peace in their town. That night marked a turning point. The townspeople finally felt free from Karen's grip, united by their shared triumph. And though Marcus knew Karen might try to cause trouble elsewhere, he also knew she could never regain the power she had lost here. The unstoppable King's Guard had proven that courage and unity could overcome even the most relentless adversary. With Karen gone, the town began to breathe easier. The weight of her constant complaints and manipulations lifted, leaving behind a sense of calm that many residents hadn't felt in years. Marcus's auto shop thrived more than ever before, not just because people appreciated his work, but because they admired what he stood for. His garage became a symbol of resilience, a place where problems were solved with patience and integrity. Customers came not only to fix their cars, but also to chat, share stories, and thank him for standing up when no one else would. The King's Guard didn't disband entirely after Karen's departure. While there was no longer an urgent need for organized resistance, the group evolved into something new. A network of neighbors committed to supporting one another. They hosted monthly gatherings at the park, organized volunteer projects like cleaning up local trails, and even started a small fund to help struggling families during tough times. The bond they had forged while fighting against Karen remained strong, reminding everyone that unity could accomplish incredible things. Life in the town changed in subtle yet meaningful ways. People smiled more often, lingered longer at the farmers' market, and greeted each other warmly on the streets. Business owners who had once feared retaliation from Karen now felt free to innovate and grow. A bakery introduced weekend specials, drawing crowds eager to try fresh pastries. The local bookstore expanded its hours and hosted reading events for kids. Even the playground, which Karen had once tried to shut down over safety concerns, saw children laughing and playing without worry. It was as if the entire community had been given permission to flourish again. For Marcus, life returned to a comfortable rhythm, but it wasn't quite the same as before. He carried himself differently now, with a quiet confidence born from knowing he'd faced adversity head-on and emerged victorious. Neighbors often stopped by his shop to express gratitude or ask advice, treating him not just as a mechanic but as a leader. Though Marcus never sought fame or recognition, he embraced his role as someone others looked up to. He made it a point to mentor younger mechanics, teaching them not only how to repair engines, but also how to handle challenges with grace and determination. As for Karen, rumors circulated about her moving to another town. Some said she tried to replicate her tactics elsewhere, targeting unsuspecting communities with her usual brand of intimidation. But wherever she went, whispers of the unstoppable King's Guard followed close behind. Stories of her downfall spread far beyond the borders of the town, serving as both a cautionary tale and an inspiration. Whenever someone mentioned her name, it was usually accompanied by laughter or a shake of the head. "Good luck to whoever has to deal with her next," people joked. They'll know exactly what to do. Marcus often reflected on everything that had happened, marveling at how far he and the town had come. What started as a personal fight to save his business turned into a movement that brought the entire community together. He realized that sometimes all it took was one person deciding not to back down to spark real change. And while he hoped they wouldn't face another Karen anytime soon, he knew the lessons they'd learned would stay with them forever. On sunny afternoons, Marcus could be found sitting outside his shop, sipping coffee and watching the world go by. Children played tag nearby, couples strolled hand in hand, and friends gathered on benches to talk. The town was alive with energy, and Marcus couldn't help but feel proud of the role he played in making it so. He thought about the phrase "Unstoppable King's Guard" and smiled. It wasn't just a nickname. It was a reminder that when people stood together, they could overcome anything.